Today's webinar is titled Aging in Place, Asking for Help, Accepting Care, How to Advocate for Yourself. This is the we have a third and a fourth program in the series that will be held in September. And all the sessions are being hosted by the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Community Health. Newton-Wellesley Hospital Community Health is dedicated to improving the health and wellness of those who live in the area we serve and focuses on addressing health and socioeconomic needs by enhancing medical services and resources throughout the community. Through initiatives that include access to health care, prevention, and intervention, the hospital is making a difference in the cities and towns in which we live and work. A significant part of these efforts is through 8 collaborative councils that strive to make compelling impact in all areas to overall health and well-being. These include domestic and sexual abuse, elder care, heart health and wellness, maternity services, palliative care, youth mental health, substance use, and workforce development. Please feel free to visit the Newton-Wellesley Hospital website at www.nwh.org to learn more and to get involved. We also have listed on our website our community programming, and we do change that and update it frequently, so please check there regularly. Before the program officially starts, I would like to mention a few logistics for our next hour that we spend together. We will be leaving plenty of time for questions and answers, and we ask that you actually post those in the Q&A feature of the webinar, and I will be monitoring that so that I can ask them at the conclusion of the presentation. And now, let me tell you a little bit about today's presenter, Julie Norstrand. She holds a master's in social work and clinical psychology. She also completed her PhD and founded her company, Help My Aging Parents. Julie has worked in the aging field for the last 20 years. And I'm going to leave it to Julie to tell you a little bit more about her background. So now I will turn the program over. Thank you.
Lauren, thank you so much. And thank you for those of you who filled out the poll. No worries if you haven't. We got enough responses to give us a sense of people's responses. And I will be going over those in a little bit. But just to give you a little bit of introduction, Lauren already gave you an indication of my background in terms of my education, but also a little bit in terms of what I do, which is to run Help My Aging Parents. Basically, I have now worked with many families, both in a consultation capacity, as well as also running caregiver support groups. And I do want to say that I have learned so much from these caregiver support groups in terms of the realities around planning for your long-term care. If you attended last week's session, which was on aging in place, I really hope you found it helpful. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions, and you can see that my email on this slide here. Now, today's presentation is going to be on asking for help, accepting care, and how to advocate for yourself. And what I found as an elder care consultant when I've been working with families, and I'm trying to help them to best provide a supportive plan for an aging loved one, I found that typically when I'm working with, let's say, the adult children, they'll express a fair amount of concern and worry for an aging parent. But I also hear from the perspective of the older adult. And what I find is that sometimes they're fully accepting of this idea of getting help or asking for help, and sometimes they're not. But I would say in most cases, people tend to be somewhere in between. I think there is a transition in all of our lives where we're grappling with this conundrum of when it is time to ask for help and accept care. But what really got me to develop this presentation was because earlier this year, the Western Senior Center, they approached me because an older adult at their place had reached out to them and had explained that she, as an older woman, had been someone who had been providing lots of care for people close to her, specifically her family, as well as neighbors that might need some form of help and support. But her question now, as an older adult, was ultimately, how do I transition from being the carer to feeling comfortable receiving and asking for help? And I think this is such a poignant question, and probably one that many of us reflect on as we're facing our own later adulthood. So ultimately, my goal here today is to get you to be more comfortable with asking for help and accepting care. And I think one critical way of doing this is by getting yourself to become a better advocate for yourself. So I'm going to be addressing all of these issues today. But what I would like as I'm speaking is for you to keep these sentences up on this slide in the back of your mind. Firstly, allowing others to show their care doesn't mean you stop being able to care for yourself or others. Also, it's not a sign of weakness, but rather a sign of our interdependence and what it is to be human. And finally, opening up to care is an act of compassion to self and others. These were all taken from an excellent article titled, "Why is it so hard to let others care for you?" And I highly recommend that. It was published in 2019. And as you can see here, the authors are Rockman and Evans. You can do a search for this article. And I would encourage you to take a look at this article. But again, as I said, try to keep these phrases in the back of your mind as I'm speaking today. But ultimately, I think this is what it's really all about. And that is, we want to be cared about, but we fear being cared for. And I think because of this, there is that push and pull between us and well-meaning offspring who are trying to provide support. But I think maybe if you can enter this phase with a greater sense of self-advocacy, then I think it might be a little bit less difficult to ask for help and to accept care. So the question then becomes, how do I become a better self-advocate? We will be talking about that as well. Let me just... So here I want to just quickly review the results of the poll that some of you were able to do, and thank you so much. So we're seeing here that it's sort of a an even split between people who say that they can relate to both scenarios of people having offered help and also having been the one to ask for help. And then many of you have also indicated that neither of these scenarios refer to your situation. What I'm curious about is, when you read those questions, did you find that maybe the one question that was a little harder to answer was the one where you admit needing help? In that article, which I just referenced a moment ago by Rockman and Evans, they talk about this issue of it can be incredibly hard to admit that you need help, second only to the idea of receiving help when it's offered. But I would argue that receiving help can also be incredibly hard, because it may make us feel more weak, maybe incapable, being a burden, causing unnecessary fuss. But again, if we can remind ourselves that being human means that we are interdependent. Ultimately, getting to this point where you're comfortable asking for help and receiving care may require some self-reflection and acceptance. So for the remainder of my time, I am going to focus on these specific issues. Firstly, evaluating your situation. Is it time for you to now to speak up? However, what's preventing you from speaking up? So some potential barriers that I've come across with many of the families that I have worked with. Also evaluating your needs. Where specifically do you think you need help? And then a really key point of this presentation is becoming a better self-advocate. And that really requires that you become more knowledgeable about what kind of resources and services are available in your area. And then towards the end, I'll talk about starting that ongoing conversation and setting up the plan collaboratively. So what I have found is that when is it time to convey to your family that you may need some support with your long-term care plans? That is something that a lot of people struggle with. And my best and very simple answer to that question is the sooner the better. However, what I find is that generally people wait until they get to that point when they feel that they are getting worried, getting maybe a little anxious about their ability to maintain their routine and or residence. And here on this slide, you see some typical scenarios that I've come across when working with families. This may be from the perspective of the adult child, or it may be from the perspective of the care recipient, the older adult themselves. Some will express that they're getting to a point where they're starting to feel that they can sense that they're starting to forget things more often. And it's not just a temporary thing, it's a consistent thing. Also, this idea of they're starting to become worried about their driving ability. They're no longer comfortable driving. And often you'll see people will talk about how in the evenings that they stop driving. And then it becomes less and less. Maybe you're at a point where you're starting to feel that it is becoming a challenge to oversee your finances and keep on top of your bills. Possibly you're starting to become more concerned about your health in general. Other families have talked about that they can see in their loved one that there is a confusion or uncertainty about things that they have done on a regular basis. And what might be the cause for that can be multiple things. And then overall, the overarching issue is often this idea of things are becoming harder and harder to maintain. The home, the garden, you name it. Now, of course, this list, there may be some other things that you personally would add to this list. Clearly, what gets one person to speak up may be very different from what another person would divulge. But the key point is that you do this exercise when you're starting to feel concerned about some aspect of your living situation. And ultimately, this does require that you're very honest with yourself. And it's also, and you'll hear me say this many times, it's so important to speak up early before problems arise. So even though you may be at a point where you're feeling like, I recognize that I need some help, I need some support, but there's something that's still preventing you from speaking up. And what might that be? And here are some scenarios that I've heard time and time again from many families. The overarching theme in a lot of this is this idea of you do not want to lose that sense of independence and control. And that is so understandable, especially because in a country such as in America, we highly value this idea of independence. I've also, unfortunately, have come across some cases where an older adult will speak to me in private and they will say they felt that they were pushed to move from their home sooner than that they were ready. So that there can be that feeling of being forced into something when you're not quite ready. It can also be that simple lack of confidence, lack of trust in those around you. Denial of your situation certainly can also be something which can be a barrier. And the last three all center around the kids, your adult children. I've heard this so many times. I don't want to worry the kids. The kids can't accept the inevitable. The kids are too busy. So I wonder which ones of these you might actually relate to. And again, we're all very unique individuals. There may be some additional ones where if you were very honest with yourself, you would say that's what's holding you back from speaking up. In actual fact, not so long ago, a woman in her early 80s approached me. This was at a senior center. And she was wanting my advice on how to speak to her children. Because as she explained, she was someone who had always been the doer. She had made the Thanksgiving dinners. She had corralled the family together. She was the matriarch of the family. And whenever she had tried to reach out to her children to indicate, look, at some point I can't keep on doing this. I will need some support. The children would be like, you're worrying too much. So her question to me really was, how do I get it through to them that I'm not going to be able to do everything myself, going on into the future. So it's something that many families do struggle with. But ultimately, again, you need to reflect on your situation and ask yourself, what happens if there are no plans in place? And what does it mean for your loved ones? So what I recommend is that you really evaluate your needs. So before you reach out to family, you start to think about, these are the things I'm concerned about. Therefore, this is what I may need. In last week's session where I talked about aging in place, I did talk a fair amount about the modifications that can be done to the home in order to be able to help you stay in the home for as long as possible. So, but ultimately, is it a matter of getting some help with maintaining the home, making some modifications to ensure that it's safe and comfortable for you to remain there? Alternatively, if it's a matter of that you're starting to feel this is becoming overwhelming, the question really does become, should I stay or should I downsize, right size? That is a critical question that you need to answer. Have you done all your estate planning? I unfortunately have come across families where there has been an emergency crisis and it became apparent that family members didn't know who the healthcare proxy was, didn't think that there was a power of attorney. So please make sure that you get all your estate planning done. I indicated that for some people, it becomes harder to maintain your finances and oversight of your bills. Again, seek professional help and or from family, if that is the case. If you are worried about your health, you're starting to sense that there is some change, then you should really go about ensuring that you get a thorough assessment and evaluation. And just a case in point, a family that I worked with some months ago, the children, the 3 adult children, were concerned about their mother's memory. And the mother proudly said in that meeting, well, I've actually gone ahead and had my gerontologist do a memory test on me. And her plan was to get a memory test done about once a year so that there could be some concrete evidence as to whether her memory was starting to deteriorate. So she really took initiative there to put in place to ensure that her memory was being thoroughly assessed. In terms of transportation, that's something you need to look into. If indeed your driving ability is becoming something where you're not fully confident and comfortable with doing so. So find out what kind of transportation options are available in your area. And then the final thing is socialization. Especially if you're living on your own, you really want to make sure that you stay engaged socially as much as possible. So how might you fulfill that need? Is it a matter of looking into possibly being more engaged through volunteerism? Is it a matter of setting up maybe a weekly get together with your friends at the coffee house or whatever? But ultimately, when you're evaluating your needs, you really want to make sure that you enable yourself to continue doing what you love and what's important to you. So let's say you're at a point where you now have a better sense of these are the specific areas where you feel that you do need some assistance with. Then what I recommend that you do is you really look into what are the resources and services that can help you with this. So this is the best way that you can advocate for yourself. By knowing what kind of services and resources are available, you're then in a much better place to put the care plan in place that you want, that meets your needs, your wishes. And an excellent place to start in this exercise is to go to the Aging Network. And the Aging Network is a system of federal, state, and municipal level resources that provide information and services about to help older adults remain in their community for as long as possible. And these entities that provide this support through the Aging Network can be as small as your local senior center or your council on aging to much larger entities such as your area agency on aging or the Aging Service Access Point. Just if you're living in Newton, you would be looking up Springwell. They are our Aging Service Access Point. And if you were to look on their website and look at the types of services that they provide, I think you would be amazed by how much you can get help with. And this slide here, I realize, is very busy, but it really just gives you a sense of the huge array of different types of services that you could look into. Now, I will say that one important caveat with the Aging Network is that the wait times for services can be very long. And this is why a fair amount of families do turn to private pay agencies, because through them, you can often get the service, let's say an aide, to come to the home much faster. In last week's session, I did talk about the Elder Care Locator, but I'm going to bring it up again. This is a website. You just simply look up Elder Care Locator, and that by putting in your zip code, that will give you the location of various aging network resources that are available in your area. Also, as we all know, these services do cost money. And for families that are financially struggling, they can go to a website called the Benefits Checkup. And this really gives you opportunity to see whether you may be eligible for assistance. Benefits Checkup basically connects struggling seniors to programs that can help them possibly afford food, utilities, medications, and other types of resources. So definitely something to check. So starting to talk about your own aging might feel like you're saying that you're becoming more dependent and that you need help. And this, of course, is never easy. But if you never talk about it, how can you plan ahead for your own future? Also, hopefully, now that you've gone through the exercise of figuring out what community-based resources and services are available, you will feel more confident in advocating for yourself. And therefore, you may be hopefully feeling more comfortable reaching out and starting the conversation with your family. So when you are ready to reach out to family and friends for the conversation, there are some things that I would recommend that you really consider. And firstly, that is, who might be the best recipient? Also, what is a conducive environment for this conversation? And then finally, how to convey the message that you're trying to convey. So regarding the best recipient, what I mean by that is, who is the best person to start this conversation off with? Is it all your children at the same time? Or might it be better just to start with one of your children? Sometimes people have a more open and easier communication style with one of their children, and therefore they would feel more comfortable starting up with that one child. But ultimately, I will say this: if you have multiple children and you start off the conversation with just one child in the beginning, it is really, really important that you convey your message, convey what you need, what you would want for your long-term care plan to all the children at the same time, to make sure that they hear the same message, because otherwise this can lead to potential bickering amongst some of the children, because one child might say, well, mom and dad said this, and another child who had spoken to the parent at another time will say, oh no, they said they want this. So again, I really recommend that you speak to everyone who's going to be very directly involved at the same time. Now, if you don't have children, or they live far away, let's say in another state, you may well need to turn to others. And this can include extended family, such as nieces and nephews, maybe your own siblings, or a close friend or neighbor, as well as paid help. Now that so many families are living far apart, often in different states, more and more people are starting to rely on friends and neighbors for their support network. And I just want to really reiterate this, because this is something that I have heard more and more, is that people who are living by themselves and where the children are far away, or they may be what we call solo agers, they're really struggling with this. How do I set up something like this? And again, it really requires some flexibility in terms of how you view your support network. And it can be, I've heard people reach out to professionals who may be the power of attorney. they've reached out to someone who lives in the same building as them, but it requires some flexibility and maybe a little bit of creativity as you're starting to set up this support network. As I indicated, some people reach out to professionals, and elder care consultants can be helpful in the initial phase of trying to set up this care plan. They can also be helpful in if there are disagreements between family members, to be a little bit of a mediator and try and get everyone on the same page. The key point is, as much as possible, to try to reach out to others for support as you start to think through your long-term care plans. In terms of a conducive environment, what I recommend is that you think about making sure that it's under circumstances where there are no distractions, and that for those who are involved, they really have a specific understanding of the point of the meeting. Furthermore, you also want to think a little bit about when are you yourself feeling at your strongest and most alert. And if relevant, if you experience some pain, you want to think about times of the day where your pain may be less. Some people will say that their pain increases over the day. And indeed, if that's the case, you would want to try and aim for a morning meeting when your own pain level is minimal. Ultimately, you want to find an optimal time. In terms of how to convey this message, here what I would say is that you really reflect on who the recipient or recipients are. Are they the type of people where it's best for you to be very direct with them? Or do they take it better if you're less direct, especially if it's a challenging conversation? Some people don't work well if you're too direct with them. So you really want to think about how that person receives a difficult message most optimally. So just as an example, if a very direct way of expressing yourself would be an opening such as, I would like to talk to you about what I've been thinking about when I no longer feel I can manage this house. That's the direct way of putting it. A more indirect way of putting it would be that you bring up another family, let's say, another example. And here on this slide, you see, how's your friend's mom doing with looking for a smaller place? Here, in many cases, it can be a helpful way of getting into the specific issue that you want to talk about by bringing up another family first, and then going on to what's really going on in terms of what you're thinking about. But again, think a little bit about how that person or people who you're going to have this conversation with, how do they best receive or handle more challenging conversations? And finally, I want to emphasize that this should not be considered a one-time conversation, but it's an ongoing one because things do change. Also, opinions change. Life circumstances can change for you as well as your own family. I have come across family members when, for example, talking about whether the loved one wants to move or not. Initially, the loved one will be saying, I do not want to move. I absolutely do not want to move. And then over several weeks, maybe a month or so, where they've had more time to reflect on things, they will then maybe be more open to the idea of moving. So again, make sure that you continue that conversation. Make sure that what you have understood as, let's say, the children, that you have understood what you, the parent, are saying to them. And vice versa, make sure that you understand what the children's reaction is to what you're telling them. As you're learning more about where you need support, it is important to not go it alone. Try as much as possible to develop some sort of plan where others can provide help and emotional support. And what I found is that for families, when they're trying to develop some sort of future care plan, is to start to think about who's good at what. What I mean by that is you're allocating responsibilities according to people's own personal strengths. You're looking at their skill set, the things that they're good at doing. So just case in point, some of your family members or your friends or maybe your neighbors are very good at the more practical stuff, such as fixing things in your home, maybe searching for information on the internet, paying bills, very practical things. Whereas others are more suited to the more emotional aspects of support. And they're the ones who it is innately instinctive in them to be the ones to reach out to you, check in on you, have a conversation with you, just a supportive conversation, showing compassion. Ultimately, you'll find people who, when you ask for support and you're asking them to do things where they feel confident and good at that specific task, are probably going to feel much more comfortable and much more willing to offer that help. But ultimately, it may require some introspection on everyone's part, and again, a little bit of creativity. Just as an example, I recently helped a family where the caregiver was telling me that she was starting to feel that she needed some more support from her other family members. And the issue at hand was that she would really like to have someone to do some of the food shopping. There, the suggestion that I made was, well, figure out who amongst your other siblings are often doing food shopping on behalf of their own family. Well, possibly you could reach out to them and say, well, whilst you're at it, could you possibly add in some additional items for myself and mom so that I don't have to worry about going out food shopping? And the exact same issue holds for you, the older adult. If you know that your children's routine is that on Sunday mornings they go out food shopping, again, say, would you mind helping me out? It would be tremendous if you can get these 10 items on my food shopping list. Hopefully, as you find that you are developing this care plan, it will become more manageable because you feel that you can advocate for yourself. And the way to do that is to educate yourself. So as I said in my last presentation, in the Aging in Place presentation, I emphasized this idea of knowledge is power. So again, the more you know, the better you can speak up for yourself and make sure that you get your needs and wishes met. And as when I work with families, I always emphasize it's about promoting autonomy, independence, and dignity. These are key values for all of us as we age. And you really want to promote that for yourself. And you want to make sure that your loved ones and those who are helping you out are also really promoting that. So just to recap, I hope that you found this presentation helpful, and I've hoped that you've gotten a sense of how to evaluate your situation. So thinking about what specific scenarios would probably indicate that you need to speak up. Also to think about maybe the more psychological barriers that are preventing you from speaking up and being aware of them so you understand your tendency to hold back. Then becoming better at evaluating specifically where you need help. What kind of support do you need? And then the crux of this presentation is really becoming a better and a stronger advocate for yourself. And that is about educating yourself about the resources and services that are available to you. And then that then puts you in a better and stronger position when you reach out to family and friends and loved ones about the support and help that you might need from them. And then again, not to go it alone. Remember the concept that I brought up earlier about this idea that we need to try to move away from this idea of being so independent, but in more to the idea of being interdependent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie, so much. And I think that that kind of last point that you just made between the interdependent and intradependent is so key. And the summary, and just in terms of being able to give us not only concrete tools and resources and knowing kind of or giving direction as to where to go, but also giving us perspective from the kind of the emotional aspect of this, because it is not an easy process. And there are so many kind of intricacies depending on where people are at, their family dynamic and aspects like that. So thank you so much for that content. I want to let everyone know that this would be a great time for additional questions. We do have some that I will share and ask of Julie. But as you think of other things, now that the presentation is over, if you want to put those in the Q&A, that would be great. And I can grab those from there and share those with her as well. So Julie, I think that, one of the things that often comes up, and it came up just in terms of some of the folks who are joining us today, is really, that piece of how do I even start this? This is such an overwhelming kind of venture and journey to start on or to be on. And so kind of what I think, if you could share with us the first step in terms of how to make that leap into navigating this next part.
Yep. And absolutely, when I've done this presentation in the community, it is a really hard topic to bring up. And what I've recommended for those who have expressed this idea of, okay, so I know all this information, but then how do I get going? And what I recommend is, if you're feeling stuck, is to maybe reach out to your peers, to your friends, and just start a conversation about, what are you doing? What are your worries? How are you talking to your family? So you start to learn from each other how you are coping with this stage of your life. I recently, or rather actually some years ago, I came across an older man who told me that he had joined a group with his peers, his friends, all older men. And the topic was very much about, how do we get going with planning for our own long-term care? And just being in that setting of talking to peers made it a much more comfortable issue to talk about, because they were going through similar concerns, worries. And so then it became that they were sharing advice, resources, and then that built that confidence. And I think a lot of the issue around why this is such a difficult topic is ultimately this idea of not wanting to lose our own independence, but also that that feeling of vulnerability and lack of self-confidence in yourself, in feeling that you can't really stand up for what you want.
Great, thank you so much. That was great. I love the kind of the support among your peers suggestion. And I think that can be, doesn't have to be a large group. It could be just one person. It could be
It can
three
be your
people.
best friend.
Yes, right.
And that's the thing with your peers, is that they know you. So they really know that, when you're saying, I can eat, my children are saying I should downsize, Your friend might be a useful mirror to you in saying, well, I have heard you voice some concern about getting up to the third floor. So they hopefully, if they're a good friend, they'll be relatively honest with you. And in this exercise does require some honesty with yourself.
Great, thank you. I think the other challenging thing, and I think maybe it happens more now with people's ability to kind of move all over the place, is geography. So if you want to move to another state, and you're trying to you gave us some great suggestions for things to link into here, but if you're moving to another state, how do you kind of find out those resources or services that are in that particular location?
So so let's say you're moving to a completely different state. The typical moves that I have come across when working with families is either um, the older adult is considering moving up to, let's say, Massachusetts from Florida, and or that they're considering maybe moving to the West Coast. Pretty considerable moves. And
Mhm.
there you can certainly look into the elder care locator, that the link that I talked about in one of my previous slides. And you can start to at least see, okay, here's some aging net services and resources available in that area where my loved one lives. So you get a general sense of what's going on. You can also certainly definitely reach out to those services and start talking to the director of, let's say, the seniors center or the aging service access point. The social worker is a wonderful person to talk to, because you can explain to them, look, this is where I'm at. I'm living in this state, let's say Massachusetts. What should I be thinking about if I'm moving a completely different state? I'm feeling quite anxious about the idea. They can be a really helpful guide for you to at least think about some of the things that you need to consider.
Excellent, thank you. Um, and then, another question. I think is a good one, and it's certainly a worry for people. Is that first of all, someone thanked you for the excellent presentation, so I want to share that. Um, but this individual is a caretaker for her husband, but she also has medical issues, so she is worried about her declining, occurring ahead of his decline. And what is the best way to kind of be honest about that in conversation, realistic, and how to go about that when you're in
Yeah.
that particular situation.
I find that in many family situations, especially when you're dealing with spousal relationships, where the person caring for the care recipient is also experiencing considerable chronic health conditions, there is that underlying continuous stress about what happens if I can no longer keep providing this support. And as I would say to any caregiver, is that you really do need to start to think about any additional outside help that you can get into the home. And if finances are an issue for you, then maybe you start to try and set up some sort of plan with the niece who can come in and provide some hours of respite for you. If you can afford it, then outside help, setting up an aide that comes and provides either some companionship or some hands-on assistance with light house duties, or assistance with possibly bathing, feeding, no matter what. You need to really make sure that you get as much support as you can as possible, because you want to maintain your own physical and emotional well-being to the maximum so that you can continue to provide that support.
Great, thank you, thank you. So my previous question was actually, so this is, I'm going to ask almost a reverse question. My previous question was when you may be going to live closer to your children. So you are, kind of leaving your home to a new location. What is it that, if you are currently still where you are, um, and your children live far away, but you're kind of needing to now navigate maybe some changes in your life, but you're kind of in two different areas. How do you kind of start that conversation?
So you're asking if you're going to be moving to closer to your children, or your children are moving closer to you?
And not even moving, like if you're, I think, in different locations than your children,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
now you're feeling like you want to make some changes, but need some assistance in understanding that you're separate from your family, physically right now. How do you kind of ask for that help?
Mm-hmm.
Is it that you need to talk to them on a cadence? Do you need to ask them to come to you for a period of time? Do you go as far as to need to ask them to take a leave of absence from work to help you do this? And, I
Right.
can see the range occurring, depending on the
Mm-hmm.
situation.
Right. So I think you're in a situation where you're struggling with how to get the family, the support system to sort of step in and provide the support that you need. And it, it and I think this could become an issue if you feel that the conversation that I described isn't really being met, isn't really being received well. Then it may require sometimes that you reach out to a professional. I have had cases where the children are not willing to provide support, even though you may have asked them pretty directly. In those cases, the older adult will maybe reach out to a good friend who is willing to talk to the children and help them to understand from their mother's or their father's perspective what is really going on. But it is important when there is a sort of miscommunication or sort of a reluctance to maybe as openly as you can to express that you're feeling a little bit of sense of hesitancy. And you can maybe ask them, am I right in that I'm sensing that you're not um, really at a point where you are willing to provide this support? Am I getting the right sense here? Am I misreading you? To give them an opportunity to be able to explain, well, look, my finances are so challenged right now that I just cannot drop any work at the moment. I'm really financially struggling. Or that it might be one of my children is struggling emotionally. And I am at an end, at my wit's end. So it's really a bad time for me to provide additional support to you, mom or dad, even though I absolutely love you. At least then you've given them a chance to explain themselves. And then you may need to reach out to others. But remember that you always try as much as possible to get their perspective on why there may be some hesitancy. And certainly also there can be disagreement among those that you're reaching out to about how best to provide support and what kind of support you should need. The most classic one that I hear is one child saying, absolutely, mom and dad need to move. And then another child saying, absolutely not. It would absolutely destroy them. And no wonder there's a breakdown in communication if those parents are hearing these mixed messages from their support system. But again, then I revert to this idea of if you can do your own homework, about what's out there, what alternative options are out there, you in that process start to better get a sort of a check-in on what you really want, what you really are ready for. So it does take some time, this process. And it does take maybe some getting used to the idea of potentially moving. I will just say a case in point, my own father, who lives in England, has lived in his own home for now almost 45 years. And we are right at this point of trying to get him to agree to the idea of moving. And it is challenging because you really are worried about, because his identity is so much inside what that home is, that garden that he has. So it's such a challenging topic. It really is.
Well, thank you. So that's probably a good place to end, I think, because we are at time, but also it just highlights that this is not easy. And, one of the reasons among several that we wanted to host this series is to have these discussions, be able to share resources and tools and give some concrete guidance, but then also kind of also give perspective that this is like you say, it takes a long time, takes patience, and this is a first step in a long kind of planning process. So to remind everyone, so thank you, Julie, very much. This was fantastic. And for everyone to know, we are going to send out the recording after this session so that people have that, as well as some resources that would be available through the information that's on Julie's slide deck, which is great. And again, to look at the Newton-Wellesley Hospital website, which is nwh.org, for other information, but also to register for the third and fourth sessions, the 2 sessions that are going to be held in September. We'll give Summer the information that we shared in these 2 sessions. And so on behalf of Newton-Wellesley Hospital, thank you all for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you again in September. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.